Kicking off the list at number 10, Madame de Pompadour. One of the most powerful women in the 18th century France, Madame de Pompadour is known mainly as the mistress of King Louis XV of France. The last ever portrait of her shows us a respectable, middle-aged woman piercing through your skull. Or your soul. I don't know why I said skull, it's pretty intense, but we'll keep it. Right through your skull, apparently. Since her birth in 1721, she was well educated, and quickly she became a member of the French court. She is remembered mainly as the official chief mistress of King Louis XV from 1745 to 1751. But in 1756, she was officially named the 13th Lady in Waiting. That's a pretty big deal. Over her lifetime, she became the political advisor to the king, which many historians aren't too fond of. But to be fair, she put in the work to get his attention. She would show up to his place in a carriage at night. She would put on plays, like actual productions where she was the lead. I don't know why I did Peter Pan, but hey, that's how I do it. She would perform plays about nymphs and the gods, so if that doesn't deserve a super like, I'm not really sure what does.
Number 9, Veronica Franco. Born of a merchantman and his wife, a courtesan, Veronica was destined for a movie-worthy life. Franco lived in the 1500s and her father ensured that she was equipped with a strong education. She quickly found a love for reading and writing, her poetry becoming part of her legacy later on. Sadly though, her beloved father died very suddenly, leaving her family close to ruin, and so her mother stepped in to give her a different sort of education. She was an excellent student, and though she married a much older doctor when she was just 16 years old, she was later unfaithful with a merchant, dissolving the marriage entirely. She then became known as an honest courtesan, meaning she was highly educated and could fraternize with important and dignified personnel of the time. She had a short affair with King Henry III of France. She also continued her writing pursuits and was even accepted in one of the most well-known literary circles in Venice, and 2 of her volumes were published. This is in the 1500s, keep in mind, that's incredibly rare. As a sexually free and intellectual woman, she would have made quite the stir. Sadly, she died penniless at 45 after she lost all of her wealth in the plague, but she is forever immortalized for her poetry and her philanthropy in helping old and destitute courtesans. Prior to the plague, she planned to build a safe house for them.
Number 8, Mata Hari. Birth name Margaretha Zell, this scandalous figure in history was an exotic dancer with a tragic past turned super spy. At age 27, Mata moved to Paris and reinvented herself as an artiste. As most do at that age and that time of their life, she tapped into her Dutch roots and started to perform these dance acts under the alias Lady Grecia MacLeod. She was the first dancer, check this out, the first dancer to go fully nude. Her shows of course got busy, people were into this newfound idea, she was the talk of the town, many towns for that matter, and eventually she got so good she started to tour. Yeah, like Green Day, she would tour all around. For years she would travel around Europe and perform these sold out crowds, but the most intriguing part was her clientele. These military officers and aristocrats would give her gifts after these shows. They wanted to hang out of course. They were in love after a performance like that. Mata was on board, she loved this, especially coming from a tragic, horrible marriage previously. This was the life that she needed. So around 1914, her dancing days were starting to decline, those patellas were starting to catch up to her, plus the war also broke out and things changed. Hari ended up being sent back to Holland and was later approached by Karl Kromer, German consul in Amsterdam, because the men she was in contact with were considered a valuable asset at this time. So she went from being a dancer to a spy, codename H21. That's so sick. James Bond who?
Number 7, Camorra. Everyone always talks about Italian-American families, but never forget about the motherland. 1, because they are still around to hurl meatballs at you, if you do, and 2, the meatballs they toss to you are the kind you ain't coming back from. The most successful of the Italian mob families, the Camorra has been around since back in the 19th century, just like awkward first dates. In modern times, they pull in around $4.9 billion per year from all kinds of illegal enterprises, from trafficking firearms to extortion. They got their start offering protection services in the 1800s during Italy's violent political struggles, and they've been killing it ever since. It's kind of a bad joke.
Number 6, the Jesse James Gang. The real-life Wild Wild West bank robber, the man, the myth, the literal legend, Jesse James. Every cowboy stereotype fits here. Facial hair? Check. Rough and rugged persona? Check. Robbing and looting with your favorite pair of 6-shooters? Checkerino. That's right, neighbor. No stagecoach was safe, no lady and her baubles were safe. That wasn't until a man named Robert Ford shot Jesse James. However, I'm of the notion that just because you shot Jesse James That don't make you Jesse James. Hence why I didn't know who Robert Ford was until I made a very savvy Google search. But we've all heard of Jesse James though, haven't we? Strange how that works.
Number 5, the Medellin cartel. You ever seen Narcos? Okay then, moving on to the next point. I'm just kidding. Pablo Escobar, Colombia. The Medellin cartel was a joint operation between multiple different Colombian traffickers and was in business from 1972 to 1993 in a huge amount of territory. Colombia, Panama, California, New York, Florida, Peru, the Bahamas, Canada. They were moving literal tons of snow each year at the height of the operation, making around $60 million a day. A day. It became political in its later years, and becoming political always ruins pretty much everything, so.
Number 4, Hell's Angels. As a large white dude, there's something that happens to us when we reach middle age. We get bigger, the bellies hang a little lower, hair grows silver and thinner, our skin begins to darken from years of neglect and binge drinking in the sun while tanning with cigarettes. Yes, that's right, it's time to buy a motorcycle, says the little voice in our heads. What? No, I'm not going through a midlife crisis. This is something said by all Hell's Angels members, or your dad, or your uncle, at one point. Despite being a fun weekend club for dads and uncles to ride bikes and all the good stuff they do, the club sadly has more police investigations than a nefarious motorcycle club that has ulterior motives. Yeah, it's not good. It's not all good stuff. Unaliving, smuggling, well, you get the point here. I'd be here all day listening all the naughty stuff. At least I'm not insecure about my aging though. I wonder how much a Corvette is.
Number 3, the Marquis de Sade. Ooh, we're getting spicy. This man was so wild that people are startled to learn that he was actually real. He is the founder of the term sadism, which should say a lot about him. And he was known for his scandalous and erotic texts that the public hungered for. Donatien Alphonse Francois Marquis de Sade lived from 1740 to 1814 and died in a mental asylum. His works were banned in France all the way up till 1957. Even his very name was scrubbed from the family legacy. Descendants, along with a very interested historian, found his work bricked up behind a wall in the attic of Condé Castle. The erotica he wrote is even too extreme by today's standards. He literally held nothing back. To people who admire him, his novels are about exploring the dark hidden impulses of human nature. Sade fought hard against the civilized restraints on behavior imposed on the state, while others interpret his work as a justification for all the awful crimes he committed. 120 Days in Sodom is his most famous work, which he wrote while imprisoned in the Bastille before being let out during the Revolution. Many look back upon him today as a philosopher who challenged control and ideas, all while still making any new reader blush.
Number 2, Anne Boleyn. This was considered one of the biggest scandals ever, this entire marriage. King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn were married. Anne was his second wife, and she was crowned queen in 1533, but only 3 years later, in 1536, she was charged with adultery, conspiracy against the king, and incest. Even worse, she was found guilty, and come May 19, 1536, she had her head taken off at Tower Green. Cut to today, was Anne Boleyn falsely accused? What do we know? Well, many believe that King Henry issued these charges in order to get Anne just out of the picture. She didn't produce a male heir, and right after she was executed, King Henry married his third wife, Jane Seymour, with the main goal in mind to have a son. Now, originally, Anne was a member of Henry's court. She was a maid of honor to Catherine, his first wife, and in typical kingly fashion, he tried to sleep around with her, but she wasn't into him initially. Now, when they did get married, it was quite the task. Divorce was a no-go under the Catholic Church, so Henry argued that Anne had previously married his brother Arthur. He argued that the Pope wrongfully granted that marriage, so he found a Pope loophole. Wild.
And of course at number 1 we have Giacomo Casanova. This man left behind his colorful life story wrapped within the pages of an erotic memoir. It was so scandalous that even a censored version was put on the Vatican's list of prohibited books. But in 2011 his scandalous pages were put on display, making the public blush. But it wasn't just his tales of sex and love that would shock you, but the sheer craziness of the life he lived. He lived from 1725 to 1798 and was the son of an actress. In film adaptations with David Tennant and Heath Ledger, he is depicted as an all-out playboy with unwavering charm. But he was also a true enlightened polymath. Voltaire, Catherine the Great, Benjamin Franklin, and Mozart all hung out with this dude. He was a gambler, an astrologer, a spy, a traveler, wrote a proto-feminist pamphlet, and a science fiction novel. He basically invented the lottery, saved a man who was being accidentally killed by his doctors, he fluctuated from penniless to extremely rich to penniless at the end of his life, and wrote his memoir while working as a librarian of all things. In and amongst his adventures were over 120 notorious love affairs with countesses, milkmaids, and even nuns. Sword fights, escapes, cons, arrests, the life of Casanova made for a very interesting read.
Number 10, the Kennedys. For the older folks at home, this is going to be no surprise, but for the younger audience such as myself, let me explain. The Kennedys were a wealthy and powerful family in the US. A lot of their scandals originating from organized crime, American politics, and some juicy rumors. The most famous Kennedy being JFK. My generation knows him from Call of Duty Black Ops 1. Remember 5? It was a good zombies map. The older generation remembers him for that one Sunday car trip in Dallas. You know what I'm talking about. He may have also been shacking up with Marilyn Monroe. His father was a bootlegger during the Prohibition era, and his family seems to have a lot of plane crashes. For some reason, I'm not sure why. The Kennedys are textbook scandalous and will be talked about for a long time to come. Number 9, the Jacksons. As much as I love fame and fortune, and baby, Chetty's all about that, I wanted to be famous ever since I was a tubby kid, and I'm slowly getting there too. Nice. I don't think I'll ever reach the same level as Michael Jackson. Seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if the first aliens that we meet know the moonwalk. Not because they're from outer space, but because the reach of Michael Jackson knows no bounds. Starting with the Jackson 5 in the 70s and rising to stardom and becoming the biggest star of the 80s and 90s. In the 2000s too. Growing up, he was pretty popular. Multiple allegations of misconduct don't look good on anyone, even for the king of pop though. He's got a few things stacked against him. Number 8, the Trumps. The billionaire extraordinaire turned POTUS is not shy from scandal. And I'm not talking about during his presidency either. I ain't gonna touch that. Some younger folks may not remember Donald Trump from the 80s and 90s, where he was arguably more famous. After getting a small loan of $1 million, built his real estate empire and perhaps broke a few laws and or using legal loopholes to get what he wanted. I mean, can you really trust the guy that slashed his name on everything? Trump Hotel, Trump Airlines, Trump Board Game. And that's just him, I guess.
Number 7, Empress Theodora. Theodora from the brothel, as she's often known as. I don't know why, but here we are. From actress to marrying Emperor Justinian I, Empress Theodora had quite the life. The two ruled together during the golden period of the Byzantine Empire. She was the most powerful woman ever seen in Byzantium. Just like her mother, Theodora was born into the theater and would travel performing acrobatics, dancing, and stripping, while also working as a lady of the night, because the two went hand in hand. She was said to have danced a particularly lurid routine with geese. Don't let your imagination run too far with that one. So how did she marry an emperor? Well, there was a tradition in the Byzantine court for emperors to marry beauty contest winners. Entrants could be from any class. But Justinian still had to amend that law that stated he couldn't marry an actress to make it happen. But she was the most beautiful, so do it up. 20 years his junior, Justinian ensured she was crowned as his equal. As they were matched in intelligence, ambition, and energy, the two heralded a new era for the Byzantine Empire.
Number 6, Cleopatra. Cleopatra had some wild methods herself to get attention, believing she was the goddess Isis. She tried to appear as the goddess as often as she could, so she would do so by preparing these dazzling entrances everywhere she went. She would also look fabulous. She was known as the most beautiful queen ever for this reason. The most famous entrance she made was in 48 BC, right when Caesar arrived in Alexandria. This was an important time in ancient Egypt. There were problems with the family. She was banished at this time, but she still wanted to meet the Roman general Caesar. How do you meet the man nicknamed the bald adulterer without being seen? Well, she had herself wrapped up in a linen sack like a bowling ball and then personally hand-delivered right to Caesar's bedroom. DoorDash. See ya. I'm gonna sneak into concerts by using this method, see if it actually works. So she won the heart of Rome's future dictator. Great, and then eventually she regained Egypt's throne. Quite the play if you ask me. Now her brother wasn't too fond of this alliance, and in a following battle he drowned in the Nile, leading to Cleopatra's ultimate return to the throne. All you gotta do is take your clothes off and jump in a sack. See ya.
Number 5, Nell Gwyn. good old pretty witty Nell Gwyn, perhaps one of, if not the most famous actress to ever take up the stages of old. Women were not allowed to perform in theaters until King Charles II took up the throne after Cromwell banned theater altogether because he was the worst. To bring back some spice to the world, not only did he bring back theater, he brought women to the stage because seeing them dressed up as men was kind of hot because they wore tights. Anyways, enter Nell Gwyn, who would later become his mistress. She started out as an orange seller in his theaters, very often synonymous with being a lady of the night, but her natural wit and charm caught the eye of an actor named Charles Hart. She soon became his lover, but she soon joined the troupe as a comedic actress. She had a series of lovers before King Charles became enamored with her. Among his other love affairs, the guy was busy. She wasn't greedy, but Charles couldn't help but spoil her. She never received a title, but after calling their son a right in front of them, and she was like, what else am I supposed to call him? Their son became the Duke of St. Albans. The public adored her and was the only royal mistress in history to provoke public adoration. Once while she was in a coach, the public thought she was the Duchess of Portsmouth. Instead, she stuck her head out the window and said, "Pray good people be civil, I am the Protestant." Good for you, Nell. She died sadly just past her 30s, likely due to the lead makeup she wore. She survived the king by just 2 years, and when he died he said, please take care of Nell Gwyn, because she's the cutest.
Number 4, Marilyn Monroe. We've all heard her name, but do we even know why? Who was Marilyn Monroe? Real name, Norma Jean. She was an actor in LA who over time became a sex symbol. She was in numerous blockbusters around the 50s, and to this day she's still an icon. Her fame, of course, meant unwanted attention at times. Most times. Like so many celebrities now, her private life was the center of attention, and it was quite a lot to deal with alone, I'm sure, let alone the entire world watching you and judging you. The rumors going around about her and John F. Kennedy and how she was having an affair, and then she divorced her third husband right after that happened, and then just at age 36, she was found next to a bottle of Nembutal pills, which were sleeping pills. Following a celebrity's life can be pretty harmful, especially when we hold them up to this standard because they're famous or they're good looking. It's toxic. If Marilyn Monroe was alive today and this all happened now, it would probably be even worse because now we have bored people on TikTok. So she'd probably have a worse time.
Number 3, Wally World. That's what my family calls Walmart. I don't know, that's just what we call it. The Walmart family is quite wealthy and tied to the Walmart Corporation, of course. And if you didn't know, Walmart doesn't have a squeaky clean track record. You mean a multi-billion-dollar department store located in over 20 countries around the world hasn't been to every rule and law applied to them? I'm shooketh. Not to diss Walmart, I love you guys. You got some good deals there, but there's no way anyone at home hasn't heard horror stories about working there. Come on, I know you're like, yeah, you're thinking about it right now, I know you are. On a more heinous note, Walmart's production methods are uncouth, as they use a version of labor I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. But in short, their clothes are cheaply made and then sold at a huge markup. But because the production was so cheap, you can walk in there and buy a shirt for $15 and you feel like you saved. You feel good. Oh, there's a McDonald's. I'm gonna go there later. Nice. It's great. I love capitalism. It's the best. Number 2, the Genovese. Probably the most infamous crime family to ever exist, or ask for protection money. One of the 5 families of New York, the Genovese family were wise guys, good fellas, tough guys, made men, part of the crew, and like Don Rickles said once, probably sat around all day and smelling their guns. I love Don Rickles. It would be difficult to quantify everything the crime family had going for them. What separates the Italian mafia from everyday hoodlums is that they are organized, hence the name organized crime. Profiteering off anything they could, really. Illicit substances, rackets, scams, gambling, and connections everywhere, really. Watch The Irishman. It's on Netflix. It's a good movie. You'll know what I mean. Hey Frank, what do you want to do later, Frank? Number 1, the Clintons. Hillary, don't come in the room. Probably the grooviest president ever to hold office. Bill Clinton was president around the time I was born, so I'm not that familiar with his politics and policies. And when I think of the late 90s, I think of Nintendo 64, Tony Hawk, and MTV, so it would be difficult for me to talk about that in any way, really. Is the Clinton family a bunch of wealthy American leaders who have some ill-gotten gains and email deleters? Yes, most likely, but you all know why this is number 1, don't you? Did you really think that me, Big Chetty, was going to talk about Clinton and not talk about his impeachment? Being one of only 3 presidents to have that process fully started. Interesting, I didn't know that. What were you guys thinking about? What were you talking about? There's nothing else he did wrong, right? He's innocent, he's good. Who? Monica Lewinsky? Who's that? She did what with his what?
Number 10, Julie Daubigny, a sword-wielding opera singer? Yes, sign me up please. I am so here for this. There is so much to unpack about this story. So she was born the daughter of the secretary of King Louis XIV's Master of Horse. She moved to the court of Versailles in 1682. Her father was an expert swordsman and educated her alongside the boys he taught because she was his only kid. She even dressed as a boy and excelled at the sport. She ran off with a fencing master and toured, showing off her skills to wide audiences. One audience member, however, couldn't believe she was a woman because she was so good, so she flashed the crowd, who responded with complete stunned silence. She began singing at the Marseille Opera, where she met her first love, a young woman. This woman though was packed off to a convent by her family, and Julie followed to help her escape. They burned down the convent and ran off together, and she was actually sentenced to death by the parliament, but Julie would continue to live on, one adventure after the next. She would later be pardoned by parliament and continued to go on to become an opera star, and had many other lovers. Number 9, Betty Page. If you're a fan of pinup art, then you almost have to be a fan of the one, the only Betty Page. She is the one who defined the art form. Page was an American pinup icon who scandalized society with her risque and alternative kink modeling photos. We can thank her for the bikini, as it was Page herself who made it popular. Pop stars to this very day model themselves after her. Her iconic haircut being found on stars such as Katy Perry and Dita Von Teese. Her poses in her famous photos were found in music videos such as she had a massive amount of influence. She redefined a sexually repressed era with her free spirit and unabashed presentation of her sexuality, but she was taken advantage of a lot of the time. Betty actually didn't make any royalties after her prince until Hugh Hefner got her an agent, but by the end of the 1950s Betty walked away after a nervous breakdown and retired as a born-again Christian. There was a lot of suffering that Betty didn't show to the world or even admit to herself. Sadly, the woman whose face everyone knew was diagnosed with schizophrenia due to severe trauma from her childhood. For years no one knew if she had even passed away, but people were still obsessed with her until she was finally tracked down for a documentary. She refused to take any photos but would give interviews over the phone. She finally hired a lawyer to try and recoup some of the money she lost for her image and spent her final days living with her brother in LA.
Number 7, the Rockefeller. Donald Trump might have been a billionaire or the most famous billionaire, but I still think J.D. Rockefeller takes the cake. And his family, actually. A little history lesson here. Rockefeller, in a nutshell, was the first modern billionaire. Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark levels of wealth. Seriously, he was pretty rich. When oil and gas became big business in the late 1880s because Industrial Revolution, cars, we need oil, his company, Standard Oil, slowly rose up until they had a monopoly on the oil industry. By cutting out middlemen and cornering the market, he amassed billions. Today, adjusted for inflation, his pockets were lined with a very healthy $23 billion. Say it again, $23 billion. That was all the way back then. Way before Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Buffett did it. I wouldn't mind $23 billion myself. Sounds good, right? Oh, all the McDonald's I could have. Oh yeah. Number 6, the Coppolas. Imagine being a not so well-known director, then Marlon Brando walks in the room and goes, "Let's make a movie." The Godfather, great movie, right? Well, it seems that filmmaking runs in the family. Awesome. A whole family of people involved in film. You gotta love that. I love film, that's awesome. However, for those fans of The Godfather, which if you haven't seen it, please do. It's a masterpiece, go see it. What's not a masterpiece, however, is The Godfather 3. You can skip that one. I can just imagine the look on people's faces when they thought they were going to see a trilogy completed masterfully. It's a real stinker, folks, for many reasons, but a big one is Sofia Coppola, who plays Michael Corleone's daughter in the movie, which in real life is Francis Ford Coppola's daughter, the director of the movie. Imagine taking one of the best movie licenses of all time and almost single-handedly ruining that. Sorry, Dad. Number 5, the Kardashians. Everybody knows the Kardashians. Everybody and everyone knows that they've had tons of scandals. Kim Kardashian being married to Kanye West is just scandal by proxy. Come on, that guy's crazy. She also had a tape that got out. Not her best moment. Mr. Kardashian was a lawyer on the O.J. Simpson case where he may or may not have done it. And of course Kris Jenner married Bruce Jenner, and who's now the fabulous Caitlyn Jenner, and her daughter was in a weird Pepsi commercial this one time, and this whole list could be about them, honestly. Strangely enough, for people who generally don't have talent in Hollywood, they sure get a lot of press. Which at some point is annoying, I'm sure. Be nice, paparazzi, or no Christmas presents. I know Santa Claus. And I'm keeping a list. It's early, but I'm keeping a list this year. Number 4, the Queen. Being the Queen of England is hard, or so I'm told. I mean, it must be kind of nice to sit in a big palace all day, eating cucumber sandwiches, and getting lost in such a big place. I know I would. I would get lost for sure. The royal family, however, are no saints and have their fair share of scandals. Prince Andrew has gotten himself into some trouble in recent tabloids. But for some who don't know, Prince Harry was quite the wild child 20 years ago. A prince on the loose, if you will. Not to mention the whole debacle with Princess Diana. The car accident is a little sus, not gonna lie. Even way back in the day when both world wars were on, there was some minor cover-up to hide the family's German heritage. Kinda hard to fight the Germans when your queens are one of the German. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. As long as there's a crown, there's always gonna be scandal.
Number 3, Mae West.
I see a man in your life.
What, only one?
Mae West. As sassy as she was on screen, she was even more so off of it. Her wisecracking, quippy sensuality became a sensation people couldn't get enough of. West started out in vaudeville and Broadway before she hit the big screen, singing and doing acrobatics. By 1926, Mae began to write and produce her own plays, the first being titled Sex. Her performance was of a woman of the night, and you can imagine the stir she caused. It also earned her an 8-day jail sentence for corrupting the morals of youth. She loved to ridicule social attitudes towards sexuality, which became a part of her trademark style. She was also a big supporter of the gay community, even writing a play called Drag as a celebration of drag in New York City, on top of it being a living room comedy. As you can guess, this also stirred up some serious controversy. But despite it all, West seemed to enjoy the reaction of the private and reserved public, loving every minute that it made her famous. Number 2, Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson is most famously known for her work to help support the LGBTQ+ movement in New York City for nearly 25 years. Marsha played a key role in the Stonewall riots that found the gay pride movement today. She was a drag performer and black trans woman who did everything she could to advocate for trans youth, homeless people, and people living through the AIDS epidemic. She even used money she earned as a night worker to help fund a refugee for homeless people. Along with fellow activist Sylvia Rivera, she founded STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which created a safe place for homeless trans youth to sleep and feel safe. It was the first LGBTQ+ shelter in North America. Sadly, however, Johnson never got to see how far the movement would take the world, as she died in 1992. Her body was found in the Hudson River, and it was ruled that she took her own life. However, many suspect foul play, as her case was never actually investigated, they just assumed. Many activists believe today that someone had indeed taken her life. Marsha P. Johnson danced, performed, and rioted her way to making the public listen to the voices people were afraid to hear, and her legacy lives on today. And last but not least, Rosa Parks. One of the loudest scandals in history that ferried in waves of change was the decision Rosa Parks made one day to stay seated on a bus. It was a scandal that transformed the world. In 1955, Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white man from Montgomery, Alabama. This simple and brave refusal initiated the civil rights movement in the United States. Her actions inspired the Montgomery bus boycott, led by a young Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Up until this point, bus segregation was enforced, and the black community was forced to sit in the back of the bus always. It was also customary for bus drivers to request that black citizens give up their seat to white citizens. So one day when Parks was riding home from work, she was exhausted. The bus driver asked part of the back of the bus to stand to make room for a white citizen. Parks was the only one who refused, and she was arrested as a result. In her autobiography, Parks writes, and I quote, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in."
Number 10, Bonnie and Clyde. It probably doesn't get any more infamous and more literal than a crime family when talking about Bonnie and Clyde. They were married, they were husband and wife, makes sense. Part of the gangster era in the 1930s America, Bonnie and Clyde were some of the worst crooks you could come across. Responsible for jailbreaks, bank robberies, unaliving police, and just looking nasty while doing it. A real sweet couple. Their days of crime came to an end when police finally caught up with a young dangerous couple and welcomed them with a barrage of bullets. Bonnie and Clyde were not great actors, but after that they did a great Swiss cheese impression. Fought the law, and the law won.
Number 9, the Winter Hill Gang. One of the most successful organized crime groups in American history, the Winter Hill Gang was actually a team of a bunch of Boston area crime groups. The Irish-American group ran around all over Goodwill Hunting Stopping Ground, and were best known for fixing horse races. The gang was famously taken over by James J. Whitey Bulger, who is just an absolutely lovely person. We should just tell him to go watch that movie with Johnny Depp. What's it called?
That movie, you know, it's that one.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it's called.
Apparently he does a really good job. The gang disbanded in the late 90s-ish, or at least as far as I know.
Number 8, Lucchese family. This is a list of the worst and most dishonorable families, so there was a good chance that La Cosa Nostra was going to show up here. Organized crime is nothing new in America. Cities like New York and Chicago have a beautiful Italian-American culture, but also the Mafia. Don't forget, they're there too. One such is the Lucchese family. The same one featured in Goodfellas. Now go see that movie. That's a classic. I know the title of that one. Go see that one. It's a good one. The family was responsible for enough crimes to make the rap sheet wrap around your head twice. Most famously, however, was the Lufthansa heist. A heist at JFK Airport back in 1978, stealing an estimated $5.7 million. Now remember, keep your mouth shut and never rat on your friends.
Number 7, Mary Laveau. Mary Laveau is an absolute legend in practice and by lore. Her mysterious past and practices made her the absolute talk of the town. She was the voodoo queen of New Orleans. Voodoo or Voodoo is a combination of West African religions brought over to the Americas through the slave trade. It then blended with Christianity and the traditions of indigenous peoples. Marie was the first generation of her family to be born free, but due to laws and practices of the time, Marie and her husband bought and sold around 8 slaves in their lifetime, though it was also believed that she aided in the escape of slaves as well. But what she is most famous for is her work as a voodoo queen in New Orleans. Many wealthy and politically connected individuals paid Laveau to aid in personal advice, intervention, and protection from evil energy. She also worked as a hairdresser, which gave her access to information regarding her clients because honestly, let's be honest, everyone's hairdresser is their therapist. Honestly, what didn't this woman do? She also ran an orphanage and helped many children have a safe home. Laveau is a popular figure in legend and lore due to her relationship to the occult, but her role in society was much larger and a little bit more scandalous than that. Number 6, Louisa Casati. Also known as the Divine Marquise, we have yet another woman of mystery on this list. Louisa Casati beguiled everyone she came across. She was a young, well-born heiress who married into the Lombardy aristocracy. The mundane was an insult to her. She dressed in extravagance wherever she went, dyeing her hair fiery shades, darkening her eyes with makeup and contouring with kohl. Her guiding principle in life was to imitate art, as opposed to art imitating life. But due to her extravagant presentation, she became the muse of dozens of famous artists. Thanks to her immense fortune, she traveled the world, leaving a trail of lavish parties that even Gatsby would gawk at. Every party topped the last. She had a collection of very special drugs, naked servants gilded in gold, wild animals. Her tombstone reads, "Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety." Number 5, Madam C.J. Walker. Madam C.J. Walker broke records and blasted through glass ceilings as the first self-made female person of color millionaire in America. She made her fortune thanks to her homemade line of hair care products for black women. Her parents were slaves who worked in Louisiana, but she was the first of their children to be born free after the Emancipation Proclamation. After an experience with hair loss, she created the Walker system of hair care. She had a knack for self-promotion that started by selling directly to the clients and then employed beauty culturalists to hand sell her wares. She not only continued to build her business, but she also kept a hand behind her to help lead future generations towards success. Walker used her fortune to help fund scholarships for women, donated large sums to NAACP and the Black YMCA, among other charities. An absolute legacy. Number 4, Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft is a feminist icon who began setting the groundwork for women's rights all the way back in the late 1700s. She authored A Vindication of Rights of Women in 1792, which is considered the earliest treatise advocating for women's rights. Wollstonecraft was born in the age of the Enlightenment in England. The Enlightenment is pretty much as it sounds, an intellectual period which advocated for reason to obtain objective truths. As part of this movement, Mary and her sister founded a girls' school in London in 1784 to educate young girls. She continued to write articles advocating for the education and equality of women in society throughout her life. She believed that if women weren't educated to the same degree as men were, then society would come to a standstill. Sadly, Mary never fully saw the success of her ideas. She died during the birth of her second daughter, Mary, who, funny enough, would go on to write one of the most controversial books in history, Frankenstein.
Number 3, the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was founded in 1910 by Big Jim Colosimo, but its main first leaders were Johnny Torrio and none other than this one guy, you might have heard of him, Al Capone. When they first cropped up, the South Side Gang was fighting gang wars over distribution of alcohol during the Prohibition, but they've moved on to bigger and better things. You know, cheerful stuff like loan sharking, illegal gambling, extortion, political corruption, and that kind of wholesome activity. The outfit has been one of the most powerful, violent, and largest unified criminal organizations in the Midwest of the US.
Number 2, oil baron. John D. Rockefeller, the richest American, the CEO, the owner of Standard Oil, but more importantly, the first oil baron and really the first man to own a monopoly on the oil industry. Yeah, that's right, I'm throwing a little corporate crime your way. I was gonna put Adam on the list here as a joke, but he didn't want me to bring up his jail time.
Hey!
Nah, I'm just kidding, he didn't go to jail, but he should be arrested though. For being so gosh darn cute, right? Anyways, all joking aside, John D. Rockefeller's wealth was impressive. Today, with inflation, it would sit somewhere in the hundreds of billions. My god. Yes, the family still has the wealth, and no, sadly, I'm not related. Why I bring him up is because laws were created after this manipulation of the oil industry, and the reasons for is absurd wealth. They were created because of him. That's insane. Dude's got a whole square in New York. I can't even afford a closet at those prices. Oh man, someone adopt me.
Number 1, the Cray twins. Reggie and Ronnie Cray. It's the Cray twins, innit? These identical twin brothers were the heads of crime in the East End of London, England in the 1950s and most of the 1960s. They were intermingled with politicians and entertainers through their nightclubs. People like Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland. With friends like that, you're bound to be a celebrity yourself. That doesn't seem helpful though when it comes to being a criminal though. Especially when one of you is literally insane. The Cray twins ran the organization known as the Firm, which was involved in crimes like armed robbery, arson, protection rackets, and assault. All the stuff that Andrew does in his spare time. Hey! I am being held against my will. Please call the authorities. Just kidding, he's great, he's great. He's great.